we had a lot to cover today. We're not going to cover it all, but I think it will at least give you a place that you can start to think about creating your own personal career. Before I go any further, I'd like to introduce the panel. One panelist, we lost one, but for great reasons. Christopher Teal's wife had a baby on Sunday evening, so obviously he's up to his neck in diapers right now. He couldn't be here, but I did have a couple of people fill in for him. So first we have Phil Palombi, wonderful jazz bassist from New York. Proto, who needs no introduction, fabulous bassist. Ray Ricker, who literally wrote the book on the topic that we're talking about today. I'm a bass player from Berklee School of Music, Bruce Gertz. The state of the gig, how to get paid. In simplest terms, getting paid is probably the easiest thing that any of us are going to do. You know, like getting paid is basically the last thing that happens after a long string of events, starting from I'm deciding that I'm going to be a bass player, I'm going to do all this work in the practice room, I'm going to get a teacher, I'm going to be good enough that I can get called for a gig. So we're going to start after the point that we're going to assume that you guys are going to get to the point that you're good enough that somebody might decide to give you a gig or to support your art in some way. And we're going to talk about the challenges and the obstacles that you'll have to overcome, and maybe talk about some strategies for getting from point A to point B. So this might actually be Gig Science 101, how to get gigs in the 21st century. So I might ask each of my panelists to talk about that, but I'll talk about myself for maybe just a minute. I'm primarily a classical player now, but I started out as a jazz player. And the path for the jazz player when I started was pretty simple. You would hang out with all the jazz players. At some point, you would get that first opportunity, and you never want to look down at that first opportunity. For me, it was a $13 gig that I walked 2 miles with my bass and my amp on a luggage rack, and I was subbing for my teacher. And it turns out that all the guys in that rehearsal band were the guys that were playing real gigs. And they started giving my number out, and the $13 gig turned into a $50 gig, turned into a show, turned into a little tour and stuff like that. But had I not decided that I would do that $13 gig, my whole career probably would be different. At some point I turned into a classical musician. That path is a little bit more defined because you can see in the newspaper there's an opening for the Philadelphia Orchestra. And you show up with 300 people, maybe you are the number one person, maybe not. And then if you don't get to the Philadelphia Orchestra, there are all these other types of gigs that you can do. So we're going to be talking about how you can sort of make your personal map. And the cool thing is that everybody here is going to have their own map. Like nobody at this table has the same career. There are no two people, unless they play in one orchestra and don't do anything else, that have the exact same career. Everybody else has a different formula. So Phil, would you mind giving us a little bit about your path?
I'm afraid he actually wrote a book about it.
Well,
all right, so I have completely different answers for completely different stages of my life. And it's funny because I was about to give one answer now when you reminded me that, oh wait, yeah, we're talking about starting out here. So the start out stages, you say yes to everything. Any type of music, just whoever calls, if they're going to pay you for something, or even in some cases not pay you, but I try to at least get paid for something. But I remember starting out, of course, Generation X started out playing rock bands, electric bass, but music is music. So you hear form, you hear groove, you make music on stage, even if it's rock music. And so when I was 14 and 15, I was playing with guys that were 30, 40, 50 years old in rock. And then I got interested in jazz, and then it was the same deal. It's like, oh, you want a break, So any jazz gig, anybody called me, yes. When I got to college, anytime anybody asked me to do anything, I studied classical music in college. Okay, we need a bass player in the orchestra, of course. Okay, we need somebody for a chamber orchestra, yes. Okay, jazz ensemble classes, yes. Okay, I'm there. Okay, combo class, yes. All right, the wind ensemble needs one bass player that does those whole notes, for 20 minutes. Yeah, sure, I'm in. The percussion ensemble needs a bass player, yes. And funneling that concept through, yes to any type of music, even if you don't like the music, When I finally got off the road, I went out of college and went on the road, moved to New York, I didn't have to worry about making money because, okay, I could go down to Smalls and play straight ahead bop with people, pulling the strings, no amp, you know, being all macho and whatnot. But then also go play like Latin jazz fusion on electric bass, you know, with another band. And then I got into Cuban music. I played in a band where half the band was Puerto Rican, half the band was Cuban, you know, and I'd say, well, is this 2-3-2-3? You know, in music school, boys, is it 3-2-2-3? That's how I play. Salsa, salsa! You know, that's all they say. You know, you had to learn because it's, you know, it's not college there. You know, it's not like, well, you know, you're timbal on a third beat. You know, it was just like you play or you don't play. And then, you know, then I started playing in a Brazilian pop band. You know, SOBs, 4:30 in the morning, playing an amp so loud my clothes were blowing. You know, on a 6-string electric. But I was working 7 nights a week. So if this is about getting paid, then it's about saying yes to everything. Now I'm at the point where I'm trying to decide, well, what do I want to be known for? Because I think a long-term career in music means you need to start putting time into your own name. You don't sit back and just be a sideman the rest of your life. The world's not set up for that anymore. Sidemen are getting paid less and less. It's becoming about people's names. So now I'm trying to refocus on, well, what do I do? What's my path now? You know, what do I want to focus on? And I still can do all this other stuff. It comes in handy. But I would say my best advice for everybody starting out now is say yes to everything. And also start writing. The more you compose, the better the player you are. And then you never know when you're going to have a chance to be on a record date. Somebody's going to say, well, we need another tune. Well, I got a tune. And then it's a hit. You know, you start being known for your writing. And that's just another avenue that will pay off down the road when people start looking for the stars, you know, being a composer. But I'll let more qualified people talk about that. So that's my 2 cents. Do everything.
Good, right?
I can't do this sitting down. Rather than talking, I was thinking about what Doug requested of us, and I think I'd just like to make some suggestions. I've done a lot of things in this business. On the playing side, composing, engineering. But there are some things that go without saying, but I think I should say it anyway. I think your most precious asset at any time during this, the last 50 years or so, the last 100 years, is your reputation. Having a reputation, oh, John, yeah, he's always late. Don't worry about it, he'll get here. It sounds really nice, it's cute, it's cool. It does nothing to help you get some gigs. Little thing like that. It's worth saying, it's worth talking about. It sure is worth thinking about. Your reputation. A thing that's really big with me, and I see it right away, it's big with all of these guys, is playing different kinds of music. Especially you younger people who maybe are in a conservatory now, and you're more or less playing the same, studying the same type of music. Maybe it's classical music. Maybe it's you're in a jazz department. You've got to branch out. And the older you get, the harder that becomes. I started the piano when I was 7 years old. And I didn't have a terribly good piano teacher. But by 9 years old, I was able to read out of the fake book. I could play tunes, you know, just the melody and the chord changes. And I was facile at it. I was quite good. I could transpose at sight. So even though he wasn't such a hot teacher and my piano chops are nothing to brag about, believe me, I still find that valuable today on many levels. The most important level, though, is I enjoy myself. I'll sit down at 10 o'clock at night at the piano and play some tunes and fool around with the changes, like the guys in Ron's band were doing last night. That's an aside. But this whole thing about having a life in music, and when I say a life, I'm talking about for the long haul. I'm looking at this bunch here, and, well, you're an exception. We've been in it a long, long time, and he's been in it a long time. Well, when you're in it for a long time, if you do the same damn thing day after day after day, I don't care who you are, 99% of you are going to change for the worse. You might become, an orchestra musician might become angry. He's making enough money to support himself, but he becomes angry. He thinks back to when he was your age, and he said, oh, gee, this is not what I wanted to do. Okay, he's making his living, he's got the house, he's got the car, or the cars, he's got the mortgage and all the stuff, you know? But that's not what I wanted to do. Well, maybe playing in the orchestra, even if it's a great orchestra, that helps. You know, it's nice to play in the New York Philharmonic, well, Philadelphia Orchestra, and go on the tours. By the way, the tours are becoming less and less because the money, it's too much money. Variety, that's where it's at, and the more the merrier, for other reasons too. Doug was just saying he played in this orchestra, but the orchestra's kind of having a hard time, so they're not working this year. He said, but I got a couple of shows and I got a couple of jazz gigs. And I got this and I got that. Well, when the jazz gigs are, I think maybe there's something else. It's not only wanting to do those things and saying yes, yeah, oh, I'll be there. Yeah, you're right, say yes. But you've got to be able to provide. Long time ago, I was working a gig up in the Borscht Circuit. It's the mountain. It's the Catskill Mountains in New York, where people my age, we learned more about music and life in one summer than 3 semesters at whatever school we were going to. Well, the bass player in the Latin band left the first night because there was no place for him to sleep. He just left. These are the kind of gigs that I'm talking about. Well, the Latin band, they needed a bass player, so that night I never played that kind of music. I had my tuxedo on, I was playing in the American band, playing on 1 and 3, that was it. Well, this Latin band, the name of it was La Quana Cuban Boys. They had been together since the 1920s, or the band had anyway. And some of the guys in the band looked like they'd been in there from the 1920s. I'm talking about, this was 1959, by the way. Well, they were happy to have, just somebody there with an instrument. They got me an amplifier the next day or 2 days later, and we're playing mambo. And if anybody plays mambo, you'll know this. You play on 2 and 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I was playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And totally wrong. I had no idea where the hell the beat was because we had the percussionist playing. There's no hi-hat to zero in on where the hell is 2 and 4. I had no idea. By the end of the summer, I was doing a fairly respectable job. They couldn't fire me because they couldn't find anybody else. So, anyway, I got to love it. I got to love the music. I played in symphonies. I played jazz. Hey, I'll give a commercial. Friday at 11 o'clock, I'm playing a concert. I don't know where the hell it is. They keep changing the room. It says black box, wherever that is. But I'm playing with another guy who plays all kinds of music. I'm 72 years old. As you can see, I still have retained my love for this kind of thing. I write music, yes, that's my main thing, but I love to play. So if you want to get the next 50 years behind you and still want to love to play, variety. You can't do just one thing. You can't do, hey, Ron, you know, he was a classmate of mine at Manhattan School of Music. He was the principal bass in the orchestra. So, you know, push comes to shove, he can do it. And he still loves what he's doing. So, that's my advice. Next.
Hi, my name is Ray Ricker. I'm on the faculty here at Eastman, saxophone player and flute. Not flute, what do I mean? 40 years ago I played flute. Saxophone and clarinet. I wrote a book. It's called Lessons from the Streetwise Professor. That would be me. What you won't learn at most music schools. And this is not a commercial, okay? So I'll just show you the book. It even won an award. Best books from USA Books, whatever it was, okay? So, how am I a streetwise professor? I went through the educational thing, you know, got a higher degree, got a DMA. Played in the orchestra, Rochester Philharmonic, for 38 years. I gave up my contract 4 years ago, so I had more time. Been on the faculty at Eastman for 42 years. So that's the academia kind of thing. But in addition, I've always been a guy who, well, when I first started here, I didn't know that I was going to be on a tenure track. It was like a part-time, not part-time, but it was non-tenure. So, you know, I did what I always did as a kid. I kept playing gigs until I got my RPO job, and then I gave notice 2 weeks later. So 40 years ago, that was my last club date, as we called it then. But also, by being able to play jazz and being able to play classical music and having kind of personality that made me take care of business pretty well, I started doing a lot of contracting and a lot of playing of commercials and jingles and themes and those kinds of things. And believe it or not, we had a really good scene here in town. In fact, the guy who owns Linden Oaks, we've done a tremendous amount of work, national stuff for him. So both sides of the thing, but in school, you know, you don't learn a lot of stuff. And so stuff about the business. So what I wanted to do was to try to encapsulate some of these things that people learn in their first 5 to 10 years out, but why wait and have all those potholes that you run into? I'll just give you a couple things. And it doesn't apply that much to bass players as I'm thinking about it, but one of the things I always tell musicians is they got to remember it's a commodity business. You know what a commodity is, right? It's like the price of gasoline. We can drive all over Rochester. It's going to be about 1 or 2 cents within, you know, the same price. Eggs, we know what a carton of eggs costs. We know what milk costs. It's a commodity market. Musicians are commodities. If I'm doing a traveling Broadway show, contracting for that, I can get the concertmaster of the Rochester Philharmonic, or I can get a freshman violinist from Eastman to play. They're going to get paid the same amount. They're going to get paid scale. So, what you have to figure out how to do is to separate yourself from the pack and be noticed, because the pack is big. Now, with bass players, right away, as soon as I think of bass players, I think of, there's lots of differences in bass players, okay? Lots of stylistic stuff, especially in jazz and pop. And so I think that's a little bit of an advantage you have. But for everybody else, more or less, it's a commodity market. And the second thing to remember is it's a referral business. So just as Doug was saying, he went there and played that one gig, and all these guys were there, and pretty soon he gets a call. That's how it works. And you get referred by the people who play the same instrument as you do. And so it's important to have friends, and it's important to be pretty nice, you know. And so just these kinds of things, a lot of it is common sense, but the great thing about music is that you figure out, if you can figure out what you like to do, you can put a tremendous career together, because it's centered around what you do. Don't try to plug into what your teacher does. You may be able to plug into a piece of what your teacher has done, but everybody's different. But the great thing, and as Frank was saying, you don't get bored. If you plug it in around your interests and abilities, let's say, you're going to have a really good time. I had one student who was was from Hawaii, and he had Japanese parents, and he spoke Japanese. So I'm saying to Ryan, you know, he's practicing classical music, and he's also, you know, trying in jazz too. I said, Ryan, there's lots of guys who can do what you do, you know, but not so many that can speak Japanese and can play jazz like you can do. You've got an advantage there. The language thing is a big deal. You know, there's all kinds of things you can do in Europe, and if you're a little better in the language than the average guy, you can make some nice little contacts and get some things going there. So you can't think your hometown, you can't think your area of the country, you can't think your state. You got to think the world, really. But the other thing is you got to deliver. That's the thing. When it's time to do it, you got to deliver, because you talk about your reputation. That could be this. They say your reputation is only as good as your last gig. So you've got to keep up the standard and keep progressing and make quality the absolute number one thing to do. So that's my little sermon. There's all kinds of things we can talk about brand. You know, musicians have a brand. Go into that whole thing, and you want a good brand, you know. And but I think that's enough to start. Maybe you have some questions. Yeah.
Well, my path kind of happened. I had piano lessons when I was 6, and it was I was thinking at the time that it was an old lady, which is probably what I am now. And she was one of those that if you do mistakes, you do like that, you know, with the hand and stuff. Anyway, I didn't care much for that. I'd rather play ball outside with my friends. And then as I grew up and saw the Beatles on television in the 60s, of course I wanted to be a guitar player like everybody else. So I convinced my parents to get me guitar lessons. I had a cheap guitar we bought with S&H green stamps. Those were stamps that you got in the market, you know, when you purchase food or whatever. And you put them in this book. They give you these blank books, you put them in. When you get enough stamps, you could cash them in for things in the catalog. So I had my eye on this Gertz guitar. It was probably the cheapest Gertz guitar they make. It's terrible. The neck warped, everything. But anyway, I got into that. I was playing that, taking lessons, and I got to a point where I just couldn't go any further. I wasn't getting the picking thing together. However, I noticed at the same time that my parents' radio had a nice big speaker, and I was feeling the bass, and all that Motown music was coming out there, and I was digging that, you know. So I'd be like, you know, coloring in a coloring book and be, you know, grooving out. So I told my teacher, I said, you know, I think I really like the bass better than the guitar. He said, why don't you tell me? You've been wasting all this time, you know. And I was taking lessons in a music store, and of course there were these brand new Fender basses on the shelf, which I was drooling over. And I convinced my father that if I took the top 2 strings off the guitar, practiced the bottom ones, went through some music with the teacher, that when he said I was ready, I could get the bass guitar. So I was driven to get that guitar. So I went through a bunch of books, learned to read bass clef. Hello, Mr. Gertz, I think your son is ready for the bass. So he loaned me the money, I bought this Fender bass. I can't tell you how cheap it was, it's unbelievably cheap. Now it's worth thousands. The next thing was, as I was playing the bass, bands like The Doors, Cream, Jimi Hendrix, all these rock bands in the 60s were hitting the radio. My friends and I were totally into it. One guy played drums, another guy played guitar, et cetera, et cetera. So we started a band, rehearsing in the house, and eventually we got into blues. So now I've already had like a rock experience, now I'm in the blues thing. And we decided to add some horns, because we're doing the B.B. King stuff and all this kind of stuff. So we got these horn players, and one of them is this 13-year-old kid who's already into Charlie Parker and Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley. So he tells me, in his Rhode Island accent, Voos, you gotta listen to Train Man, Paul Chambers, you know. So I start collecting some jazz, and I'm just in love with this sound of that bass. So, because of the passionate feeling I had for it, I decided I'm going to take up the upright bass. And so I got into that, and I started playing jazz. But while we were in the rock band, the blues band, whatever, my father had a big station wagon. And so because I had the car, I was the only bass player in town that had a car. So I had all the gigs. You know, at the teenage gig, I was 16, I got my license. You know, we had our band. Come on, guys, we're going to load up the wagon. We drove down to Providence. I'm from Rhode Island. Up and down the streets of Brown University. We go in there, we say, look, we'll set up and play for you right now. We want to do a gig in your church or whatever, you know. And this one priest was very nice. He said, you don't have to audition. We have dances here all the time. You guys can play next week. So we went in there and we did a gig, and we didn't make any money, no money. We just played for the dance, you know. But it was just such a ball, you know, like, to play for these people. And the joy of music is what's kept me going. And when I went to Berkeley eventually to study, I decided at the time that I needed to learn to improvise, and they didn't have a lot of methods. Your books probably weren't ready yet, I don't know. And so I decided I'm going to take composition, and that way I'm going to learn how to improvise by studying composition. And it turns out that that's really what improvisation is. It's composition, but in a quicker way, kind of composing on the spot, you know. And so I got into that, and I ended up being a composition major at Berkeley with a principal instrument bass. And I studied classical and jazz, and I became a writer. And in the process, I also would write bass lines and bass exercises and things like this. And so over time, I compiled this huge amount of material that ended up being bass books, bass method books. And I ended up being the publishing end of things as well as the playing thing. What else happened? I think you meet people, like you said, these guys, on gigs. You know, you go to a gig and you meet a new drummer, a new sax player, a new guitar player, and they play in other bands. And they recommend you. You know, if you're a nice guy and you show up on time and you take care of business, they recommend you, and then it grows like a tree. You know, just branching out, the friend of the friend of the friend of the friend. And the next thing you know, your reputation starts to build, that you're a nice guy, fun to be with, and you play good and you're on time. And so things just kind of ballooned for me in that sense, as they have for these guys, I'm sure. And I primarily, I play a lot of gigs. I also ended up teaching at Berkeley because at the time that I was graduating, they were growing so fast that they needed teachers. And I had a good relationship with the bass chair there. And I said to him, gee, I wouldn't mind doing some teaching if you need somebody. He said, oh yeah, and you know the ropes because you've been here, you know. So I got my foot in the door early, and without having to have a master's degree or a PhD or any of the paper, just based on my abilities, you know, and my knowledge from composition and, you know, having written stuff. And I've been teaching there ever since, 37 years. And during that time, I've had many, many gigs, one of which was 6 nights a week for 3.5 years, playing swing music at a hotel. And every musician that could play and read would pass through that gig as a sub or whatever, and I'd meet them all, you know. Matter of fact, Ed Barker, principal of BSO, was a friend of the trumpet players because they went to New England Conservatory together. And he showed up one night, and they wanted him to sit in. And he said to me, look, I don't read any changes. It's got to be notes. Gotta be notes. No changes. I said, oh, well, yeah, they're going to play this King Porter Strum. It's all like, you know, 2-beat, you know. But there was 1 or 2 measures in the middle of the chart for some reason that had chord changes. Just 2 measures. And so anyway, he's up there playing, and he gets to that 2 measures, and he stopped playing. I don't know what to do. I couldn't believe it. This guy's like a top guy. You know, I was like, wow. But I mean, I could never do what he does. See, everyone has what they do that's special to them. And so my specialty is being friendly. And I remember a lot of jokes. Because when you play these gigs, you know, you're going to hear, if you play jazz, probably mostly jazz musicians are like this, but the hang is very important. You have to be good at the hang. You know, that's a very important part. You know, if you can play great, if you're not fun to be with, they don't want you around, you know? Oh, yeah, it's a pain in the ass. We don't want him. You know what I mean? But Gertz, he knows some good jokes, you know? Yeah, so you got to be into having fun, you know? Yeah. So in the course of my career, I've become a record producer, a recording engineer, a bassist, a composer, a method book writer, an educator. And like Frank said, you know, you have to continue to follow your love and create new things or new ideas, have new ideas and diversify, because if you do the same thing forever, you're just going to dry up. You know, you won't have that love anymore. So you have to follow that, whatever it is that gives you that passion, that thing, you know. I grew up in a family that was real tight, and I thought when I was like 20 that I should get married and have a family too. But this passion for music was so strong that every time I had a relationship with someone, I always say yes to every gig first. And so the girls would say, were like, he's saying no to me because he wants to be with that big bass, you know? And so they all, and you know, back at that age, you know, people, they want to hang out and have attention, and they don't want some guy that's always out doing something else. So it took me till I was almost 40 years old to settle down. I had to find a girl that didn't want me around much.
No truer words were ever spoken. If you're going to be a musician, he just gave you all the great bit of advice.
I have the most wonderful wife. She is just wonderful. I mean, she does miss me, but not having me around is just fine with her. So, anyway, just follow your passion, but like these guys said too, you got to practice. You got to have the goods to deliver. If you don't have the goods, you got nothing to sell. See? Now at Berkeley, we have a course. It's called the Professional Development Seminar, and I just started teaching this course. It's a liberal arts course, and we deal with the modern aspects of getting a reputation, which involve the web. You know, having a website or some kind of YouTube clips or something that can show you to the world. Because, you know, you need exposure. You might not get enough exposure just in doing local gigs, because like the gig scene is kind of drying up, you know, but worldwide, you might do better. You know, sell some tracks. If you compose, you can sell individual songs, or you can, there are websites that are looking for music for films, or commercials, things like that. Maybe you can submit some of your tunes to those things, or recordings of your music. So anyway, yeah.
Well, I would like to ask the panel what you see as the emerging opportunities for musicians coming up? Because I mean, I'm your generation. I've had a career. I've done all kinds of things, as Bruce knows, and some of you folks. But you know, gigs have been drying up, like he says.
Right.
People don't hire musicians for parties and weddings like they used to.
Right.
Recording has gone virtually down the tubes to one guy with a synthesizer and a vocalist, as far as commercial jingles and stuff. Shows, you know, again, all the stuff that was traditionally good venues for us as we were coming up are now going by the wayside. So I'm interested to hear what you guys see as the opportunities for the young musicians.
Well, I think one of the opportunities is, well, although we're living in a time when the traditional gigs that we might think of, you know, from maybe the 60s or 70s or even from 100 years ago are starting to dry up, we have tons of opportunities to expand our potential fan base. You know, so it used to be like if you were a good bass player in Philadelphia, you know, like I remember years where I actually did 400 gigs. And, you know, like I might not have to leave the Delaware Valley. People outside of the Delaware Valley wouldn't even know about me, you know, because like, you know, I didn't have a website, you know, so I didn't know how to find out who was the person who is leading these gigs, for example, in Allentown or something like that. One of the great things is that you actually have almost unlimited capability to connect to potential collaborators and fans. You know, so one of the things that you want to make sure you do is that you don't think small. You know, you want to figure out how to communicate with people who are like-minded like yourself. You know, like it used to be like if you, like for example, if you made like a red ball that didn't bounce, you could say, I'm never going to sell that. But there are 1 million people on the planet that are looking for a red ball that doesn't bounce. You know, 20 years ago, you couldn't find those 1 million people. But today, you know, I mean, it's the stupid cat video thing. You know, like 1 billion people have watched the video of this guy trying to make his cat dance. You know, so one of the things that I think we have that creates an opportunity, although another challenge, because not only are you as a bass player trying to find out about the guy that's leading that gig in Allentown, now every bass player on the planet sees that there's a gig open in Allentown. So that challenge becomes an opportunity, and then how do you separate yourself from the pack? Like I'm an aspiring Luddite, and every day I try to learn like a new technology. But when I contacted Phil about you know, being on this panel, he sent me his digital press kit. And you know, after I figured out how to open it, I was like really surprised that Phil, in like 2 seconds, gave me more information that I knew about him than I probably knew about any bass player before I had reached about the age of 30. You know, long, short bio, complete discography, and who he's played with. So if I were looking for a bass player, I could get a real good picture of what type of job Phil would do for me before I even listened to the music that came along with this digital press kit. And maybe Phil could talk about that, maybe Ray could talk about some of those things.
Yeah, it's, well, you mentioned there's two things going on here. You mentioned like having gigs, wedding gigs, you know, work. You know, there's your art and your craft. And I'm pessimistic on the craft side of things because live music is disappearing. It's hard to book gigs. It's hard to find, you know, just to be background music. But then the other side of that is, well, everything Frank talked about, you know, you have to find something you love to do and, you know, make it a broad base. But playing weddings the rest of your life, I know guys that have made decisions in their life, and this comes down to something that I've always done naturally, actually. You have to choose music over money. But we also have to make money. But you have to be happy in the long term if you want to stay a career, if you really love music. So, you know, it's a really, I don't want to discourage anybody, but everything, I mean, you got to take everything we're saying and really think, I mean, sit down and think, find a buddy, drink your adult beverage of choice, and just like dream about what you imagine yourself doing. Like in a perfect world, I am John Patitucci. Okay, perfect. You play all, you're a great player, great composer, you're working, people, you're teaching, you're making lots of money. So, but you need to figure out what is your perfect role. Now, I would say you have to temper it against the reality of what is money used for, what's important. I mean, the mansion, Beyonce living in a mansion, do you need any of that crap? I mean, do you need a Ferrari? Yes, I would love a Ferrari, let me tell you. But do you need one? At one point I realized what was important to me: health, healthy family, my record player, my bassist. And having people sitting there listening to me play music that I'm happy playing. And as long as I could go through life and not have to worry about dying because I couldn't afford cancer treatments, or got hit by a cab and couldn't afford hospital treatments, or I'm malnourished, then I have officially made it in music, and then that I'm in Dharma. So I think when you think about gigs, when you think about making money, you have to temper it against everything that's about making you happy, but then you have to be able to play what you really want to play, so you don't actually, because, wedding gigs, that stuff's going on. I mean, I used to sub on Broadway. I loved the pressure of, okay, downbeat, boom, first note of the show. You got to play that perfect, or else the conductor's just going to scream at me. And I love that pressure. I love playing Broadway, but then ultimately, I see people. Steve Marcus once said to me, he's like, yeah, getting a Broadway show used to be like getting a play. Now's the crown jewel of your career. There's people coming to New York because they want to be on Broadway. I'm going to be a Broadway musician. Well, I can't get to New York, so I'm going to be a Broadway musician. And I'm thinking, do you think that job's going to be here in 20 years? So when he talks about my EPK, I'm thinking about what bassists are out there doing what I want to do. And the one thing they all have in common is I know their names. And it's okay, if I'm a piano player, I'm gonna hire a bass player. Okay, what do I want? Do I want Eddie Gomez? Do I want John Patitucci? Do I want Ron Carter? Do I want Dave Holland? The one thing all those guys have in common is they have a thing, and they have a career, and they have the way they present themselves, the reputation. And so I'm thinking, well, you gotta start somewhere. So Douglas asked me for an EPK. I have a website, I have videos, I have this. I try to put my best foot forward. I try to show my, personality, the hang. I know 0 jokes. I gotta learn more jokes from him, but he's right about that, man. So you can't think about there's no more wedding gigs in my neighborhood. You do have to think global. You got to think about getting your name out to the 1 million people that don't want the red ball that bounce. And that will help you get any gig you want. Oh, you're happy being 7th chair in the New York Phil? I can say I probably would be for a while, But there's 14 million people that could do that chair, but the guy that actually has a bit of a name, maybe has written some books, and can tell a hell of a lot of jokes, and can handle his liquor, is going to get the gig. And he has to deal, he has to be able to play good. On top of that, let's go without saying, you got to be able to play. So.
That's the first thing, you gotta be able to play.
12 hours a day and shit, so that's without even saying.
Well, one of the things we did at Eastman was, about 15 years ago, we got together, the faculty, and said, knowing something about music and being a good performer is table stakes. There's other things that you need to do to be successful in music. And so we decided to make a curriculum of this. And we've got about 25 courses that we teach each year. And I'm the person that's in charge of this thing. It's called the Institute of Music Leadership. So we have programs, courses in, first of all, in recording. There's 2 different levels. We have one in digital portfolio creation, where the students come out, with a digital portfolio at the end of the thing. We've got 2 courses in how to get grants. That's an important thing for musicians. There's money out there if you know where to do it, and it's so easy. It takes a couple of searches, and you'll find some stuff. And not everything is a National Endowment grant with thousands of people applying for it. Some of them are very, they're kind of hidden. We've got a course in how to win an orchestral audition, not how to take one, how to win one. And it's a lot more than just playing, your stuff. You got to be mentally tough. You got to be able to be on it right away, with all kinds of distractions. So they really do a great job on that, handling stress, that whole thing. Let's see what else we have. We've got a couple of courses on leadership issues in music, like what are the big problems in music today? A course that I teach called Entrepreneurial Thinking. Just thinking as an entrepreneur and not, creating your own thing. One of the main things is to be proactive. You can't wait for it to come to you. You've got to, in your own way, your own personality, not too pushy, you know, but in your own way, just make something happen. You know, if you wanted to get a gig tonight, well, not tonight, in a week or so, you could find something. You know, if you go into a place and if you just say, I'll play for, you know, food, you know, which is a whole other thing, and musicians give it away too easily, you know, especially younger people. But anyway, it's being proactive, taking the bull by the horn, and always committing to quality. You'll have a great time in life. A friend of mine played cats for 16 years. You know, that's a gig.
Yeah.
That's a sentence. You know, you think, and orchestra people, you know, I played.
I do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I played it, and I said in the RPO for 38 years. You know, you think it's one of the best things, you know, but after a while, you say, geez, how many more times am I going to play this piece? You know, it's like anything. You've got to really keep your attitude good and always trying to find something new, and even the great standard repertoire, you know, to keep yourself interested and not burned out, really.
Andrew Lloyd Webber can become a pain in the ass.
I would add to what Ray and Phil said about being proactive is I live in a very small town in South Jersey, you know, Williamstown, New Jersey. And if someone would have told me 10 years ago that there would be 2 places where you could hear jazz weekly in Williamstown, I would have felt their forehead. But one day, and of course that shows my backwards thinking. But one day, one of my students said, hey Doug, I want you to come hear me play my gig on Sunday afternoon. I said, where are you playing? He goes, I'm playing in Williamstown. And he mentioned the name of this bar, and I've been passing that bar for like 10 years, and it was a biker bar with a dirt floor. And, you know, he decided, you know, I'm graduating from college, and I need to get gigs. And he basically did what the lithograph salesman did. He got in his car and he drove down the Black Horse Pike and he stopped at every restaurant and bar and asked them if they wanted to have music. And this bar owner said, you know, I think it might be nice. We might be able to try to get like a brunch crowd at the biker bar. But stranger things have happened. And you know, I think they did it for about 6 months, but he had a steady gig. And it was just because he created a gig out of nothing, you know, and now that there's a big diner near me, and they opened up a sports bar, and they figured out, you know, like in New York City, like Monday night is the night that a lot of places will have like big band jazz or something like that. I don't know how they figured out that Tuesday night was jazz night in Williamstown, but for the past 2 years, they've had jazz in the sports bar. And when I can guarantee, because I know the owner of the place, that when they said we're going to have a sports bar, that the word jazz was not in any of the conversations. Like when they went to the bank to apply for the loan, to pour the footings, they didn't say, oh, we're going to have jazz on Tuesday nights. But at some point, you know, they put up the 15 screens and they had the people coming in paying too much for like Budweiser. They said, you know, Tuesday's like a slow night. I think this guy that came in and said, you know, I can bring a band in for like X number of dollars. And they're still having it, and they have it on the marquee. Like you drive through Williamstown, it says Tuesday night. So being proactive in your thing, you know, making your website, not waiting for people to come, but, you know, going out and asking people, do you need a bass player? You know, I'll just share like one story. I actually got an orchestra job in South America for a couple of years. And before that, I had been working full-time. I had like theater work, I was doing ballet, I was doing classical gigs. And I left town for 2 years. And one of the dangers about going on the road is that people lose your number, like in a minute. Because like anybody that's hired Phil today, if Phil goes out of town, they're going to hire another bass player. If that guy does a good job, like Phil's got to get that gig back. And it's going to be hard to get that gig back. So when I finally moved back to the States after being away for a couple of years, it had not occurred to me that the phone would not ring. You know, it did not occur to me that the phone would not ring. You know, and I moved back in with my mom, and I actually ended up getting like the one time that I had a job that wasn't related to music. Like I got a little job in sales, and you know, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he asked me, well, how are people going to know you're back? You know, So, you know, the next couple of weeks, like I actually called every musician that I had known and just told them, I'm back in town. I don't want to take anybody's place. I don't want to get put ahead of the line, but I just want to make sure that you know to have my name on the list. And you know, the equivalent to that today is like have a resume that's well written, and you can email that to every person that you know that hires people. You know, your resume could be, I mean, slick like Phil's. And, you know, like somebody's going to look at that and say, man, next time I need a bass player, Phil Palombi, man, that cat played with my car silver. He played with this guy, played with that guy. It's going to be something that sticks out.
Or a little something to write the resume.
Well, don't laugh, because I know we think, many of us, almost every person that you know that is making a good living at music has at least one or two things he does that you would not think would be in the toolkit of a musician. Like I know musicians who design websites for a living. I know musicians who, and here's a word that I didn't know existed, are sound designers. You know, like they make noise that goes in the background of car commercials and things like that. But somebody asked them, hey man, do you think you could do like sound design for this? I know musicians who are really good writers, and they are grant writers. Like they charge $100 an hour to write grants. So if you find that grant that Ray is talking about, and you don't think that your writing style would be appropriate, there's probably a musician who does that. You know, so think about one or two of the other skills that you have that you might not think are related to music, and just tag that on to bass player, composer, web designer. You know, Bob Cranshaw. What is he, a doctor? Bob Cranshaw also has another degree in something. But there are lots of musicians that have other skills that they're highly skilled at.
Peter Rowe was a lawyer.
Yeah. You know, so don't discount the fact that, like, for example, you take good photography. Like, you could be the band's photographer. You know, you could be the person in charge of merchandising. Like, if you're in a rock band today, while you're sleeping in the bus, what's actually paying for you guys to be on tour is the merchandising. You know, because the record company is making the money off of your records. Great. And we're actually technically out of time, but we will stick around to answer questions till we get kicked out. So thank you to